This time on Only in America, a message of hope on immigration from Senator John McCain's final words.
We have always had so much more in common with each other than in disagreement. If only we remember that and give each other the benefit of the presumption that we all love our country, we will get through these challenging times.
Senator McCain spoke often of American exceptionalism, but who will continue his work in the Republican Party under President Trump?
Senator McCain had it exactly right. Immigration and being able to welcome people from all parts of the world and give them a chance to be Americans is part of American exceptionalism.
And my conversation with Idaho's Jim Jones, a former state attorney general, state Supreme Court justice, and a Vietnam veteran, who is now advocating for immigrants and refugees in the Gem State.
We're from everywhere, and we shouldn't be treating people as if they're somewhat subhuman or less desirable or valuable than we are. We're all God's children.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America.
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 Only America.
Only in America.
Congressman Will Hurd, a Texas Republican representing a large swath of the U.S.-Mexico border, returned from a 3-day trip to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, more convinced than ever that America does not need a border wall. Here he is, aboard a boat on Lake Amistad, near the border town of Del Rio, speaking to CNN.
Lake Amistad is an example of something that's already a physical barrier. With 67 miles of lake on either side, it's hard to get over it. But it also has an ecological balance. People depend on this lake for irrigation, depend on it for recreation and commerce. And this is a particular area where the need for a wall is unnecessary.
Congressman Hurd is a strong critic of President Trump's immigration policies, but he faces a tough challenge from a Democrat in November's midterm elections, reflecting the dilemma faced by many moderate Republicans. But the news that has shaken the country is the passing of Senator John McCain, 9 years to the day after his friend from the other side of the aisle, Senator Ted Kennedy, passed away. For decades, Senator McCain was a champion of immigrants, refugees, and migrants around the world. A few days after his death, Senator McCain's farewell letter to the nation was released. The letter carried a strong message for America's future and brought tears to the eyes of his longtime aide, Rick Davis.
We have helped liberate more people from tyranny and poverty than ever before in history, and we have acquired great wealth and power in the progress. We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down, when we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change they have always been.
So where now for Senator McCain's philosophy and a Republican Party divided on the issue of immigration? Here's Linda Chavez, president of the Center for Equal Opportunity, speaking on Minnesota Public Radio.
We're a country that has welcomed people from all parts of the globe, and eventually those people become Americans. It happened with my Irish ancestors who came here during the middle of the 19th century. It happens today with Chinese and Indian and Mexican and other immigrants who come here seeking a better life and who eventually either become citizens or their children are born here and their children are born American citizens because of the 14th Amendment, and they integrate into our society. So that is what makes, in part, America exceptional. And Senator McCain had it exactly right. Immigration and being able to welcome people from all parts of the world and give them a chance to be Americans is part of American exceptionalism.
And on the Senate floor, Lindsey Graham spoke passionately about his best friend, Senator McCain.
He taught me that principle and compromise are not mutually exclusive and the foundation of a great person as well as a great nation. He taught me that immigration as hard as it is to solve, somebody's got to do it. And he said to me with Ted Kennedy, "You're going to learn, Lindsay, that the other side has to get something too." I have learned that lesson. To my friends on the other side, as long as I'm here, I'm going to remember that you have to get something too.
From our perspective, Senator McCain's voice will always be a clarion call of courage and compassion, and his leadership will be sorely missed on immigration and across a range of issues. His death led me to think about what it means to be honorable, to be worthy of honor. As I think about his career and our times, there are few more worthy of honor or deserving of the title, the Honorable, than Senator John McCain. So, thank you, Senator McCain, for all you did for migrants around the world. I'm Ali Noorani.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America from the National Immigration Forum. I'm Ali Noorani. After serving as Idaho's Republican Attorney General, Jim Jones went on to serve as Chief Justice of the state's Supreme Court. After retiring in January 2017, he's followed a passion that he's harbored since he served as a U.S. Army captain in Vietnam half a century ago. He told me the plight of Vietnamese refugees gave him an aching heart, and the political environment we face now has led him to speak out. So these days, he's advocating for the rights of immigrants who served in the military and their families, many of whom now face deportation. He organizes legal assistance and speaks out in the national and local media from his home in Boise, Idaho. A recipient of the Army Commendation Medal and the Bronze Star, he talked to me about his astonishing career and his new life as an advocate for immigrants and refugees. What was it like in 1942 when you were here?
Well, it's interesting because I grew up 5 miles south of the Minidoka relocation camp, which had a large population of Japanese Americans who had been rounded up and hauled off to a concentration camp. We had German prisoners of war who worked on our farm, so you kind of got a broad cross-section of people. Of course, I was pretty small at the time, so parents just related these things to me. Actually, my mother came from a German-American community, so there was some feeling of kinship, and they just talked about how the German POWs really enjoyed working on the farm. They were kind of glad to be out of the war. And when I was growing up, I dated a young lady from Twin Falls whose father had been incarcerated at the Minidoka camp. So it was just something that you grew up with. I don't know that there was a lot of discussion about what an unfortunate thing that was, but as you get older, you think, how could we have done that? How could we have taken that attitude toward Americans who were good citizens? Anyway, it kind of broadens up your thinking, and I think it just brings home to you the fact that we're from everywhere, and we shouldn't be treating people as if they're somewhat subhuman or less desirable or valuable than we are. We're all God's children.
So tell me, kind of growing up and enlisting in the Army, and at kind of what point did you decide you wanted to pursue the law?
I started out, I had an uncle who was an engineer, a civil engineer, and he worked in Afghanistan in the late 50s, and I thought, wow, that sounds exciting. I think I would like to do that. So I started at Idaho State in engineering, and I didn't like this drawing stuff. You had this drawing board and compasses, and I loved the math, but I hated the drawing. And then John Kennedy spoke out at his inaugural and said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And man, that struck me like a lightning bolt. And I thought, I'm going to be a United States Senator, because it was the world's greatest deliberative body. Well, what did you do? Well, you had Johnson and Kennedy and Nixon, all prominent politicians that year, and they were all lawyers, and they'd all had a war record. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll go into the law, I'll go into the service, and then I'll be a politician and I'll be a senator. You know, you had to explain to the people that were concerned about this flood of refugees that were coming from Vietnam, these boat people, that these are wonderful people. These are people who are fleeing persecution, and we ought to open our arms and give them safe harbor here. Some people, I had one argument with a friend of mine about whether these folks were better off, with a nationalist government running the whole country or not, and it got kind of heated. But it really burned me to have, here we helped to set up this problem. And all of these people were fleeing for their very lives in boats that a lot of times were unseaworthy, and they were put upon by pirates. And people were saying, well, we don't want them here. And luckily, we had leadership in Washington that said, well, we do owe them something, and let in quite a few people. When I see the same thing happening with wars that we stirred up in the Middle East, the United States, in my book, is one of the greatest creators of refugees that there is in the world. We went into Iraq, displaced over 1 million people. A lot of people went to Syria, and then because of that and because of the way we conducted that war, we helped to start the ISIS problem in Syria. And now we're turning our back on that wide body of refugees that we helped to create and saying, well, sorry, we have nothing to do with that. And it just pains me. It just hurts my heart.
How does the combination of your service in Vietnam and what you saw there, your legal service here in the state, but then also your faith, inform how you see these issues?
Beyond the question of refugees, we have a lot of people here in Idaho who are undocumented workers from Mexico. Were it not for those people and good friends and relatives that live down here and make their living on farms, were it not for those people coming up here to take jobs that nobody wants in this area, our farming industry would be in really serious trouble. And we're having some really concerns now about the zero tolerance policy and all that. Our dairy industry is reliant on year-round workers. The majority are undocumented. So that's one aspect of it. I think the economic aspect is really important. We need to have a program that will allow people to take those jobs and maybe have better ability to move back and forth. I think some of the people would just as soon not live here, but keep their primary residence in Mexico, but they don't know if they can ever get back if they go home. And with regard to refugees and immigrants generally, if you look at the teachings of Jesus, he says that you have to treat each other as a brother. You need to reach out, and a lot of the people that we have coming to this country as asylees or refugees are running from oppression. Their very lives are in danger. And I think we have a responsibility to reach out and give them safe harbor. And if we're going to live our faiths, I think we have to give credence to the teachings of Jesus and say, yes, we're going to help. We're going to do what we can.
In our advocacy work, and based on some research we've done, the work that we do every day, we've come to kind of believe that Americans have 3 fears or anxieties when it comes to immigration. I wanted to run this by you and get your sense of whether we're on the right track, but then more importantly, okay, if we are on the right track, how do you overcome these fears? And I think these 3 fears are culture, security, and economy. And there are 3 questions that go along with them. Culturally, are immigrants integrating or are they isolating? Security-wise, are immigrants threats or protectors? And then economically, are immigrants, refugees, giving or taking? Is this the right way to be thinking about the way that the broader public is grappling with this question?
Well, culturally, we've kind of had a Jekyll and Hyde attitude as Americans for so many years. We want people to come in and, mow our lawns and do the crappy work. But then we say, well, they're not culturally adapted to being Americans. We've used the old culturally adapted forever. Back in 1845 to 1852, when the Irish potato famine was in full swing and beleaguered Irishmen were coming to this country, we said they'll never adapt. They're a bunch of drinkers and carousers and criminals. And the next thing you know, these people are saving the Union in the Civil War. They fought bravely. And you had people saying, well, let's round up these Japanese. They're a danger to our society. The most decorated unit in the Second World War was the 442nd Infantry Brigade, which was composed of Japanese Americans. They were decorated with 22 Medals of Honor. I think they adapted. And we said that the Vietnamese would not adapt. This is America. This is the great melting pot. We have, you used to hear, when I was going to law school in Chicago, this guy that was in my class says, the Polish people have never done anything to distinguish themselves. And you're thinking of Chopin and all of these accomplished people who were Polish. I mean, you have people who are claimed to be from, how do we put this? Can I say excrement hole countries?
I try to make this a family-friendly podcast, so I appreciate that.
But, I was talking to a class up at Boise State, an advanced placement government class, and a young lady whose parents were teachers in the Congo and they fled for their lives was the president of an organization called the Humanitarian Club. Just a wonderful young lady. She had a really good op-ed in the Boise Statesman about how modern-day building specifications can be environmental friendly and help save the environment. I mean, just a really good piece. I've met so many people in the immigrant and refugee community in Boise who have embraced this country and adapted to this country and are doing wonderful things for this country. And they are out and out proud Americans, which actually was the name of my unit in Vietnam. We were the Proud Americans. But they come with energy and enthusiasm. And the people that come to this country are just like the people who came in the early 1920s and so on, fleeing the ravages of war. They have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they want to do things in this country that will make it better. You have people like Hamid Ulikaya, who set up the yogurt plant here in Twin Falls. Would it have been a good idea to exclude him? It was really difficult for him to come to this country to study, and he stayed, and he gave good jobs to people in the Magic Valley at the yogurt plant, the Chobani plant. You look at all of the people who have come to this country lately and done wonderful things. The CEO of Micron Technology, one of the biggest chip makers in the world, is not a refugee, but he's an immigrant from India. And he and an immigrant from Israel and one from Taiwan had built up SanDisk corporation and sold it for $18 billion, bringing wealth to this country. I mean, how can we say, we're all immigrants. Even the Native Americans who live here immigrated to this country about 18,000 years ago. So this country is totally an immigrant country, and how can we say, well, we're going to keep these people out, or we're going to keep those people out, or we only want Norwegians? Hell, the Norwegians don't want to come here.
So recently you wrote an op-ed in the USA Today, and it was about Alejandra Juarez, whose husband is a sergeant in the Army, and Alejandra was deported, she ended up leaving before she was formally deported. What went through your mind when you first heard about that case?
Well, I thought it was outrageous. Here you have the wife of someone who has, served his country, served in Bosnia with the Marines, and then went to the National Guard in Florida and served the country in Iraq. His wife of 18 years is, kicked out of the country. What kind of a place is that? When I went to Okinawa for about 3 months, my CO was a German national, and he was gaining his citizenship through service to the country. He had an Okinawan wife. What are we going to do? Throw those people out? I had one relative who was reputed to have come to this country in about 1786 or somewhere in there. Or maybe it was earlier than that, but anyway, he'd come to this country with the French forces to fight for America, and he got wounded at Charleston, and the story is that a nice lady was out there going around the battlefield and found this guy and helped him back to health, and they got married, and that's one of my ancestors. When people serve the country, or the people in this MAVNI program who are willing to step forward and do something that most Americans don't do anymore, that is serve the country in the military, put their lives on the line, we ought to treat them with respect. We ought not to be deporting them or their family members.
So let's say you're at you've got 5 minutes at a cabinet meeting. You've got Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security, the President, Chief of Staff. What would you tell them?
I would tell them this, that the current struggle we're having with extremists around the world is kind of like the fight that we had in Vietnam and perhaps in the Middle East. We are trying to win the hearts and minds of the entire world. And when they see the United States turning inward and trying to get rid of all of the refugee programs to try to shut down immigration, we are giving fuel to the extremists around the world who want to do great damage to this country. We have always had the aura of being the big White House on the Hill that was open to people from all across the world, who was looked to as the moral leader of the world. If we're going to relinquish that title and start turning inwardly and be cruel to people who seek refuge here, it's not going to be in the national interests of the United States. It's going to hurt us. We won't have our friends and allies that we have had in the past. When we get into a pickle, I don't know where we're going to turn. We need to do a dramatic turnaround, and our national security and our economic security depends on it.
One last question for you. The name of the podcast is Only in America. So I ask of all of our guests to finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Only in America do we live by the rule of law assiduously. If we ever give up living by the rule of law, we are lost.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure enough.
Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet.
Jim Jones is a Vietnam veteran who is Idaho's Republican Attorney General and Chief Justice of the state's Supreme Court. He's a member of Veterans for New Americans, and there's more about Justice Jones at our website, immigrationforum.org. And while you're there, why not subscribe to Only in America? That's all for this week. Our podcast comes to you from the National Immigration Forum in Washington, D.C. Regina Medina and Emily Chow are the producers. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer. I'm Ali Noorani. Talk to you next week.